All right, welcome to the Wiggin Sessions, surviving and thriving in the post-pandemic world. It's not really true with the Delta variant, but today is more about the thriving side because we're talking about wine, something that's dear to all of our hearts. I have with me Will Bonner, founder of America's only private wine partnership, the Bonner Private Wine Partnership, and Diego Samper, who is a full-time wine explorer and working with Will on the Bonner Private Wines. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thanks for having us, Addison.
Thank you for having us. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, well.
The pleasure.
Yeah. Yeah, we should probably toast to get started, right?
Yeah.
Cheers.
Right, cheers.
I'm the only one without wine.
Oh. Well, you're
It was
the
a
rep.
long holiday weekend, Addison, and early in the week.
So I wanted to get started with just kind of a general history of wine, just to give context. One of my favorite stories is, especially since we lived in France for many years, they're very proud of their wine industry, but they were attacked by a fungi that almost wiped out the entire region of Bordeaux and then was creeping up into other parts of the Burgundy area and stuff like that. And they were actually saved by a smuggled sapling from the California vineyards and then grafted onto some of the vines that were in the old vine that were in Bordeaux, and the California vines were resistant to the fungi that was attacking the entire industry in France. It's a story the French don't like to hear very often, but I find it entertaining. Do you have any more insights on how that came about, what the fungi was? And I'm just interested in the history of wine. So.
Yeah, I could say a little bit about it. It's called Phylloxera, and it's like it's an aphid that attacks wine grapes, and it was brought over from indigenous to the New World, indigenous to California, and a botanist brought clippings over to Europe that, unbeknownst to them, had this Phylloxera aphid on it, which then proceeded to devour the European grapes, which weren't resistant to it. And so, but what we've been finding in our work is that there were a number of areas that were not, aside from California, that
We're not affected.
Also resistant to this Phylloxera, and one of those places, and it happens to be because of the soil conditions in some cases, and that's the case in northern Argentina, where we source our Malbec from, and also on some Mediterranean islands, such as Sardinia. We source some wines from there that are also pre-Phylloxera original European grapes. So yeah, it was definitely a very pivotal moment in wine history. Do you have anything to add to that, Diego?
Yeah, and I think also Chile has a little bit of that with the Carmenere, when they always say like, oh, we lost all our Carmenere and everything, and then Chile comes up like, oh, we have it. We have a little bit of that left, and it's that part of the transition of like the old world accepting the new world, because they had no other route in terms of winemaking. So it made it just like we collaborate with each other and we will make better wines from now on. But before that, it was like, we cannot take the new world wines. They are not as at the level of our European wines, especially for the French. So it was a moment of being humble and started to cooperate with each other.
Well, that's good. And that's the birth of the modern wine industry, right? The shipping across seas and stuff like that.
Completely. And the introduction of different barrels. It's also a different different woods, the American oak, then the European, Slovenian oak, the French oak. So we just had full diverse conditions now to be able to explore now new wines.
How do the Australian wines compare? Do they are they susceptible to Phylloxera, or were they?
I don't think they were affected to Phylloxera, but they were also a late type of country to start producing wines. Who was Penfolds, probably the biggest wine producer in there, starting like around the 50s, 60s. And it was just a full different change of how to make wines. And again, they didn't have any credibility in the position. So when they came into the world, especially Penfolds with their, I think it's Cask 52, I think is the name of the wine. And it's like one of the most chaste type of labels you can try to find of Australia. So yeah, they were. I don't think they were directly affected, but they definitely were a late bloomer in the wine industry. But they have lots of fields producing at the moment. So
Argentina was relatively late, and I do want to get to Argentina. We're talking about Malbec, happens to be one of my favorites. They were relatively late, but I believe it was the Mondavi family that introduced Malbec to Argentina. And they took the grape from the Burgundy Valley, and it did okay there, but it was kind of sour, and it thrived in the higher altitudes of Argentina. That's the way I understand it.
Well, yeah, the Malbec loves the high altitude, which is a development that was, discovered by chance. Malbec is, indigenous to South Central France, and it was being produced by the Gauls, and the Romans came in and they tried their grapes that they brought with them, which didn't do very well in this area of France around Cahors, where they produce Malbec today. And so basically the Romans found out from the Celts, from the local Gauls, that this grape does well in this area, and so they started planting it everywhere. And originally like 10,000 years ago, and then came down through Mesopotamia, through Lebanon and Syria into Babylon, and then ultimately to Egypt, and then from Egypt to Greece, from Greece to Rome, from Rome to the French, and to the northern, eventually to the English, who went around and the English and the Spanish went around in the Americas planting grapes everywhere. And it wasn't until much later, till they got to California, that they actually found a terroir, a region that could grow grapes relatively well. It's amazing what a new discovery it was. And then watching this course of wine follow the civilization development of civilizations. But one of the biggest, examples of this that I find interesting is when Noah's Ark landed on Mount Ararat. The first thing he did, the first thing to reestablish civilization, was to plant a vineyard and grow grapes and drink wine and get drunk and pass out. And then you knew man was reestablished.
Yeah, right, exactly.
The order was reestablished. I think the way of how, what Will was saying about how grapes have been spread, and you were asking specifically of Malbec, across the world, Argentina is very particular because it had lots of migration. You had Italian migration, you had Spanish migration, and then you had the religious migration from the Spanish coming from the north, through all the Inca valleys, and then they found in there one of the conditions that is perfect for growing grapes, and it was irrigation from all these civilizations previous to Spaniards. So they actually already had pretty much the crop set up for them to be able to get their wine for their mass or whatever they were doing with it at the moment. But it was one of the reasons how these like Malbec was getting into Argentina was thanks to the priests. And then we've connected directly to one of our winemakers we work together, which is the Dávalos family that goes how many generations? Maybe 5 or 6 generations of winemaking.
I think.
And it's on that I think it was his Doña Ascensión, I think it's the woman who brought some grapevines from France, and she planted them. She was a miner. She owned a few mining. She was mining. So what was she doing exactly?
In northern Argentina.
In the north of Argentina.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And she, this is in the 1830s, by the way. And so this woman Donna Ascensión, essentially founded the Argentine winemaking industry
in the north,
of Argentina, which is not well known. People think winemaking started in Mendoza in the south, but it really didn't. It first was in the north of Argentina, and on the same tract of land where the first winery in Argentina was founded is where my family's cattle ranch is, and where we discovered this wine ourselves. It's on the same piece of land, and it's where we make wine with this same founding family in the same area. And so these are grapes grown at over 8,000 feet and elevation. And so the Malbec is able to produce a very thick skin to protect itself from the extreme altitude conditions. And it's in the skin that develops these very rich tannins and resveratrol and flavonoids that are so good for you. And so it's these grapes clinging to the edge of survival and just that their ability to produce this thick skin. And these grapes tend to be very small, when you pick them, and it also produces a very low yield at really high elevations relative to lower elevations. So everything converges in a perfect balance of survival to make this grape, and it's very unusual. It's an unusual thing, to be able to make wine in the middle of the desert at over 8,000 feet altitude. It's only in this region in the world. So it's actually a very special place, which not many people know about. I didn't know anything about it until we went there. In being involved in real estate, we stumbled upon a little hobby vineyard on the land and didn't think much of it. But when we tried the wine that the neighbors made, we thought, "Whoa, this is something interesting. This is something special." Yeah,
I've been to the ranch, and that the little plot is kind of small, and the stone wall that goes around it is it's like 100 years old, right? And the vines themselves are over 100 years old.
Yeah,
we went into that little plot. It's like 100 by 100, maybe, right? And there was just bunches of grapes hanging down, and you could just pull them off the vine, and they taste great even without turning them into wine. Yeah. It's pretty amazing that it exists where it does, because it's like there is irrigation that's been maintained by the families in the valley for hundreds of years.
Yeah, but, that snow melt from the upper Andes that comes down, and they've got to be really careful about how they use it, because that water is so precious because it barely ever rains. Yeah. And then just below you in the valley is Hess, right? The Hess family. Right. They're a Swiss family that made most of their money in Napa Valley, but then opened up this vineyard in it's the Calchaqui Valley, right? Calchaqui, yes.
Calchaqui. I get that wrong every time. They have an interesting plot, and they have a very odd modern art museum.
Yeah.
Right in the middle of the desert. You go in there and you're like, what?
Yeah, it's like an extreme, like light exhibits.
Yeah.
It kind of looks like a wall, but then you can walk through it. And Diego and I have gone through it together. It's really neat, but it is in the middle of
Very bizarre. And that's the meeting.
Yeah.
Since the ranch is so remote, that's the meeting point from people that are coming up from Salta, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. That's the last spot that is like fully furnished, all working, a nice pool. Then you go a little bit up, and then you're off on.
You're in the desert.
On the desert, yeah. That's the Museum of James Turrell. He's known for working with light. So
yeah.
Like if no one is like, if some of the listeners are, you can Google him. But what he really does is like he removes your shadows type of it. He works so well in the light. So when you walk in, you don't know where you're standing. You lose your sense of perception. It's very interesting.
Yeah, especially after a couple glasses of Malbec.
Yeah, because you have lunch in there and then you go in.
Yeah, it's very interesting too, because it's so remote that when I met your father, Will, they waited for a day for us to get there because there was heavy rains in the mountains and all the rivers had flash flooding. So there were 2 rivers that we had to wait for the water to subside before crossing. And that took us, we were coming up from Calchaqui, and it took us like 9 hours to get just to the Hess family winery.
Yeah, you have a good story with that, Will.
Go beyond into the desert, and it's another hour and a half.
Yeah,
up into the valley. Yeah, it's a very fun experience.
That's a dangerous time of year because we use those arroyos, those riverbeds, as roads up there. And suddenly you see a little stream start to come in, down by the wheels, and then suddenly it turns into, you see like raging water headed your way, and you got to get the hell out of there to not be washed away.
Yeah. There is. I just wanted to get your opinion on this. If you're headed back from the Calchaqui, did I say right? Calchaqui. I'm going to get it. Calchaqui. If you're headed back, there's you get sort of to the edge of a mesa, and then there's a long winding switchback road that goes down into the valley. It's like how you get. That is that's one of the most amazing scenery or like views that I've seen in traveling on 6 different continents. It's really amazing.
I think
when it was being explained to us how you get there and what it's going to look like, it was way underplayed. We got there and we're like, what? This is like a national treasure for sure.
Yeah.
It's amazing to me too, when you go from the climate of Salta, around Salta City, which is almost like a jungle, and then you head up that road that you're talking about, and
Alto del Obispo is called. Just so.
Yeah. It takes you up into the clouds, and so you're in this kind of jungle, climate. It's like steamy, and there are palm trees.
Tropical, yeah.
And then it's tropical, and then you're going up and up and up, and then you get in the clouds. You can't see anything. You can't see trucks coming the other way on the tiny, road.
Tiny road, yeah.
And my family, my brother, my dad have all gotten into like minor car accidents because you can't see anything coming around a curve there. And you go, and then you can't see anything up in the clouds. And you drive, for, I don't know, at least an hour and a half, 2 hours, until you pop out up into this high altitude desert, which is a totally different landscape.
Also, yeah.
It's so dramatic.
And you have
also at like 14,000 feet in elevation and overlooking, that whole area at the top of the mesa there. It's really.
Yeah, the fauna changes, everything. And you start seeing flying condors. Remember we were, and you have and you're like, wow, it's completely different. And then you are different animals. You're gonna have their guanacos that are usually the ones that cause accidents. They are like the deers of Salta. But it's a very nice. And then you end up in a desert again. And then you go to the Cardones National Park. That it's all those red mountains that you may see in Salta. They're like, look, you end up you feel like you're in Arizona or the Grand Canyon type of that type of color with huge mountains ahead.
That
It's beautiful.
the valley that the ranch is in, doesn't that end at the Continental Divide and on the other side is Chile?
Yeah, we share. I think it's shared some of the Andes mountains in there.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
it's
we're
a
not,
very interesting place to grow
not
wine.
that far from the Bolivian border either, to the north.
Yeah,
It's very interesting because you end up having salt mines in there. You have tobacco fields in the tropical climate of Salta, and then you have these vines growing in the extreme altitude. It's very, very nice. It makes very different microclimates depending on the altitude.
and there's also the most well preserved mummy in the world.
Oh yeah, 3 kids.
Yeah, 3 kids.
Yeah, that's how and they were preserved because it was such extreme altitude where they were buried.
Yeah,
They were almost frozen, and then they discovered them. I don't know. I think 14,000 feet or higher. I think it was even like 20,000 feet. It's like a much more story behind them on how they were buried. But yeah, they're super well preserved. You can see the lies of the kids when they're inside the museum. But it's a fantastic region. When Will was like, one of the things that was Will saying about France and Argentina compared is like Argentina, the Malbec adapted so well because in south central France, in Cahors, you can have like 2,500 hours of sun a year, while in Salta you can be having 3,500. So that helps that the ripeness of the fruit is completely different, and that's just a start. And what he was saying about the thickness of the skin, how it contracts, like the temperature change during the day, it's extreme.
70,
it's very high between the
thermal amplitude. It's just massive.
Great, and that causes that the plant is the grape. It's expanding and contracting every day, and that makes it less big, like other. It's not a big fruit, but it's very concentrated and very thick skins, which is the most important thing in wine.
and that's why Malbec itself thrives up there, but something like Cabernet or say like a Burgundy doesn't do as well because it's thinner, right?
It's thinner, and one of the things is that, like, you can, when you say Cabernet, what Cabernet offers you is like a longer finish on your mouth. But when the Malbec is just fresh fruit, and it's just like short, and it's very floral, it's very nice, very lots of red fruits in it. It just makes it a little bit easier also to drink.